Welcome back to Fasten Like Nails, the official podcast of Lamplighter Ministries. Today, Mark and Shad discuss the tools that women possess that can help redeem hearts for Christ. And ladies, if you're having a hard time in your family, please listen through to the end to hear a special and encouraging word from Mark. Let's listen in.
Well, Shad, we're going to give this another go. You and I just struck up a conversation about the tools of femininity, and we talked about Esther, and we talked about some of the women that we met recently at a conference, and they were going through quite a bit. One of them, her husband, she believes has been sleeping around and hasn't been coming home at night. Another woman has 10 children, and she said she married an unsaved man, didn't realize it until a few years after they got married, and his morals and values are just not anything she wants her children to follow, and she was thinking of getting divorced. And then you and I had this conversation about the tools of femininity. Do you remember what we talked about?
I do.
I'm glad you're a man of many words this morning. I guess this one's going to be on me, huh? Oh, if you could see us right now passing the phone back and forth, see who's going to start this conversation.
You know, Mark, you demand a whole lot. I mean, I'm dodging in and out between 18-wheelers here, trying to get you to the airport in time, and you want me to carry the conversation.
Okay. So one of the things that I learned in that message was that here Queen Esther was married to a polygamist. You know, he's got other women in his harem, and she's kind of depressed about it. She's kind of like saying, you know, what can I do? You know, look at my husband. And Mordecai, her uncle, comes around and says, hey, if you don't do something, then God will raise somebody else up to do something. Maybe God has placed you in the situation that you're in for such a time as this. And she awakens to that challenge. And again, here she is. She's married to the most powerful man in the world. He's sleeping with other women. And what does she do? What she's been doing is she's isolated herself. She's protecting herself, and she doesn't want to do anything to upset the apple cart here, because not only is he the most powerful man in the world, but if she approaches him in the wrong way, he can have her killed, or at least have her banished like he did his previous wife. Remember Vashti?
Yes, I do. I remember that, and I'm thankful that God's made me a man. I'm thankful that God's made my wife a woman. You know, I'm very grateful for genders. I'm grateful that God has made a diversity in the sexes. But the tendency of a woman most of the time, not always, but most of the time, is to withdraw, to pout, if you will. And it appears from the text that Esther does do that for a little bit, but then Mordecai comes to her and says, hey, perhaps God's raised you up for such a time as this. God will raise deliverance up for the Jews from somewhere, and if he does, you and your family are going to be forgotten.
You know, the Jews would wake up in the morning and they would yell out, I'm thankful I was not born a publican, and thankful that I was not born a Gentile, and I'm thankful I was not born a woman.
Right.
And, you know, we live in a day in which, you know, the equality of genders is really almost gone the opposite direction. You know, there's been such an emphasis. You know, women have been so mistreated and so devalued over the centuries that now we're living in a day when there's trying to get that equalization, and we've almost gone the opposite direction. Now the feminizing, and now, you know, we got the whole gender crisis. I just heard recently there's a school in Maryland that they're actually teaching kindergarten, first, second, and third graders that they still have a right to choose their gender if they're confused about it. And so I think, you know, we need to really look at our gender and be so appreciative. You know, I would think that just as you're thankful to be a man, I would think that a woman would be just as thankful to be a woman.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. Was, you know, by God's grace, we have 9 children. The first 4 were girls, the last 5 are boys. And I have tried to raise my girls in such a way that they are thankful to be girls, and grateful to the Lord that God has made them a woman. And our boys, we're raising the same way. We want them to be totally boys, and we want our girls to be totally girls.
You know, the beauty of that is when boys and girls, men and women, start to live out their God-given roles of femininity and masculinity. John Piper wrote a book, What's the Difference? Folks, if you've not read that book, it's a short little book. It's actually it's an excerpt out of one of his larger books, but What's the Difference is a must-read, especially in this gender crisis culture that we're living in, because there is a beauty when our roles are lived out, the God-given roles that He's given us. Something happens. When you see a woman living out her femininity with class, with that calmness of spirit. I think it's 1 Peter, 2 Peter, I'm not sure. It talks about, the hidden person of the heart.
1 Peter 3.
Chapter 3?
Yep.
2 Peter or 1 Peter?
1 Peter.
1 Peter chapter 3. It's the meek and quiet.
A meek and quiet spirit.
The meek and quiet spirit of the heart. And not just that a woman needs to be quiet. We're talking about that grace, that living a life that is full of grace and strength and beauty. And when a woman has that, she's so attractive, isn't she?
Yes. Yeah, can you imagine anything more ugly than a female Shad Bolen? Think about it. If I was trying to be a woman, that would make the common person want to puke. But if you were talking about a meek and a gentle spirit for a woman, for a man, God's plan is servant leadership. Jesus said, "I didn't come to be served, but I come to serve." Yeah. And so that is our role as men in our homes, is we're to be the first one to be willing to die for the good of our family.
Jesus was a man's man. He cast out the money changers. He whipped them. He was one not to be fooled with. People were afraid of him sometimes. Yeah. He called it like it was. He told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Satan's going to sift you like wheat. He was a man's man. He didn't pull any punches. But he was also a man that a bruised reed he would not break, and a smoking flax he would not put out. He took people where they were, and if they needed to have a gentle approach, he was gentle with them. He would not break something that was already bruised. And I think masculinity doesn't always have to be throwing out the money changers.
So if I could take the liberty of recommending 2 resources, Mark, what you're just talking about there, about the strength and the compassion of a biblical man. I think some of the best resources that we have at our fingertips is 2 books by Stu Weber. One was called Tender Warrior, and the other one was called 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart.
And I'd add Raising a Modern Day Knight to that list as well.
Yeah, that's a great book too. But those 3 books delve into the scriptures and show you the biblical pattern for manhood. I know in Stu Weber's book, The 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart, he's got the warrior pillar, the king pillar, the mentor pillar, and the friend. And he shows how those characteristics get skewed and how they hurt. Like the king pillar, when it gets out of balance, he becomes a tyrant and a brute. And then for the women, one of the great books for the Christian body is the book by Elizabeth Elliot called Me Obey Him. My daughter's got that book. My mom, my mother-in-law, my wife, and of course my daughter too has read that.
Another book that for those that are planning on getting married is Passion and Purity by Elizabeth Elliot.
Yes. Yeah, Passion and Purity is great. You'll get some real humorous stories there about Elizabeth and her affection for her future husband Jim, and she really loved Jim, and Jim was a college wrestler at Wheaton College, and Jim got word that Elizabeth liked him, and he sent her a verse of scripture. You know what it was?
No, what?
It was in 2 Timothy. It said, "No soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but his plan is to pursue to please only his commanding officer." That's paraphrasing, but Elizabeth was like, "Whoa, this guy's really serious."
That's good. Well, as we turn the corner here to the airport, I think we're going to have to close on this part of the podcast. But I'd like to talk a little bit more, Shad, as we get together the next time about the tools of femininity and what that really means for a woman today as she's dealing with a husband that maybe is not being faithful, or a husband that's just not the kind of man that she would admire in her home before her children. How does a woman deal with those kinds of things today? Now, I think that, let me just say this, that if a woman is dealing with a man that's unfaithful, that needs to be dealt with severely. You know, she needs help with that. And she's a Christian, that's where the church comes in, and church discipline. And I think a woman needs to be strong in those areas. You don't let a man get away with stuff like that.
Or if he's abusive.
Right.
If he's abusive, you need to appeal to the authorities that God has placed, and that's the law.
The law, the church, the family, yep, absolutely. But if it's not something that is breaking the law, not something that is abusive, and she's dealing with a husband that just isn't someone that isn't the role model for her children, or someone that she wants her husband to be more of a participant in the marriage, and she wants to be one with her husband and really be intimate and want this relationship to grow in Christ-likeness. Rather than fighting and isolating, there is something that Esther teaches us in the book of Esther, that when she was confronted with this situation with her husband, who was not the best moral mentor to the kingdom there, but she decided to do something different. She followed the advice of her uncle, and she put on the tools of femininity, and she put on a dinner that night. She got dressed up, she looked beautiful, and when she went before her husband and her enemy, Haman, she had a request, and she didn't just set out everything in front of them. She made them kind of think, what is she up to?
She built on anticipation.
She built the anticipation, and then she did it a second night.
Yeah.
And then she did it again a third night, I believe, and it was then that she got her husband's attention, and what she did is she got her husband's attention back upon the beauty of her femininity, her God-given role in her marriage, and her husband started realizing what he had, and he was willing to start changing his ways and protecting her the way he was designed to protect her in the first place. So, Shad, as we end this part of the podcast, I'd say let's do this again, but let's do it in a studio.
Sounds good.
Well, that was an experience Shad and I won't easily forget doing that podcast driving down the highway. And I'm here in the studio now, and I just wanted to give an encouraging word to the ladies who have been listening. In 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, "Likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without a word be won by the conversation of the wives, or by the behavior of the wives. For after this manner in the old time the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, as long as you do well and are not afraid with any amazement." When I reread that this morning, the phrase adorned themselves, being in subjection to their own husbands, just popped out at me, and I studied that word adorned, and it carries the idea of to put in the proper order, to decorate, to adorn, to garnish. And this idea of subjecting oneself, it's the Greek word hupotasso. And when one subjects themselves to another, I think we've had this, some erroneous teaching of this thought of being submissive and subjecting yourself, being kind of a doormat and placing yourself under. But that's not what it's teaching at all. What the word hupotasso means in Greek is to place yourself under in order to lift up. And we often so want to change the other person. We so badly want them to change to meet our needs that we're unwilling to stay under because of the hurt. But even if the other person doesn't change, when we do it God's way, we receive great joy in doing it because we know that we're not doing it for man, we're doing it to God. And so I just wanted to give that encouraging word that we need to turn our emphasis from trying to change other people to really doing things God's way because it changes us. God bless you.
as we walk this road together and fasten like nails.